How was your weekend?
My weekend was the first time I've gotten to mellow out all week, but I did have the most me week in the entire world, Mike. I went to a 1990s ska band show, and then I went to the beach where the seaside is beautiful and there's a mechanical corn dog that you can ride. There's a giant mechanical corn dog.
A mechanical corn dog.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
on that point, this is In Orbit every Wednesday, Earthlets. Borak Thung.
Get 2000 AD now. Get.
Welcome to In Orbit every Wednesday, Earthlets. I'm your host, Molch-R, and this is my co-host, Chloe, and mechanical corn dogs. Now, I feel like there's something being lost in the translation here, some transatlantic misunderstanding, because that sounds filthy.
It is filthy. It's a mechanical corn dog ride that was installed by a seaside corn dog restaurant back in like the 60s. It's disgusting. But no, like every time I think of like British seaside, absolutely beautiful, wholesome experience. No, you go to a place here and there's a restaurant called Grumpy's right next to a restaurant called Proto Pup that is going to let you ride that mechanical corn dog for a whopping 25 cents. So
Wait, the restaurant is called Proto Pup?
Yeah.
Because that sounds like dog food.
But it's corn dogs.
In which case, it's corn dogs made of canines.
This is truly like the transatlantic divide. It's like it's a corn dog, and you're like,
I mean, there's a reason David Lynch's most successful product was based all around the American Northwest, because it's weird.
Yeah, it's really weird. And you can visit the lodge from Twin Peaks. That's like a couple hours from my house. Isn't that the best? I love it here.
Borak Thung Earthlets. We are back. Thank you so much for the feedback on last week's episode, where we talked about Judge Dredd's most villainous moments. And again, fantastic discussion online. I mean, whenever one talks about the villainous aspects of Judge Dredd, when good guy or bad guy in that kind of weird binary, you're always going to get strong opinions. So well done to the chap who is absolutely holding forth on Facebook at the moment about how he's a good guy. But some really good suggestions on YouTube, including Bullet to King 4, which was the precursor to Trifecta.
Mm-hmm.
Where Dredd was just a bit of an arsehole. And what was the other one? I mean, we talked about the Apocalypse War as being the most obvious. Yeah. The obvious one, but I'd like the ones that I chose were all about the little moments where he's just a bit of a sod towards like a citizen, and it was nice to see like a lot of people's favorite villainous moments of Dredd were exactly that.
We're kind of like these tiny little nuances where it's just like, that would just be terrible. That would be not only like terrible, but annoying too.
Yeah. And it's kind of one of those ACAB things as well. Like it just whatever Dredd's role in the story, he's nonetheless he's a bit of a grumpy boot boy. He's not going to be pleasant. He's not there for a good time. So thank you for all those suggestions. I did my favorite comment was ZB42 on YouTube, who said, really enjoyed this week's show. The highlight being the look of horror on Chloe's face when at the end Michael said, "Chloe, final words." And in hindsight, I did spring that on you. Let's be brutally honest.
Yeah, that was really rude. I'm going bright red right now because I did have a total moment of being like, "Hi, I don't know."
No, it's wonderful.
It's all
Well,
good.
I'm glad that everybody is enjoying the weekly show. And we are talking this week about Prog 2418. Which is out now in the UK and digitally, and will be out at some point in the States. Obviously, there's quite a lot going on with comics distribution in North America. So, best of luck, Earthlets. I mean, that's a relatively minor thing that's going on in the United States at the moment. Let's be brutally honest. Just so everybody knows, that wasn't microphone feedback. That was literally the noise that Chloe was making just then.
Yeah.
Fun times.
I live here.
But yes, 2418 with a mighty
Look at that.
wraparound gatefold cover by Nick Percival for the new Judge Dredd story, which is The Shift by Ken Nyman and Nick Percival. I mean, dread and horror. I feel like this is the theme for next week's episode is dread and horror, and specifically not kind of like we can do like a top 10 or something like that, but I specifically think next week we should dive into why dread works with horror so well. Considering it's sci-fi, and yet like some of the best horror moments in comics I think are from Judge Dredd.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Yeah. Oh my god, that's gonna be so much fun.
Yeah, right.
I'm preemptively excited to do that.
And what's even nicer is he says, "Sorry, I've run away from my microphone again. I keep
Look how
doing
yellow your pants are.
If anybody wants to do the reading for next week, I recommend the Horror of Police by Travis Linneman, which is a fantastic book about drawing on the language of texts of horror fiction. Travis Linneman recast the police not only as self-proclaimed monster fighters, but as monsters themselves.
Just some light reading to do over a week.
Yeah, it's a great book. Fantastic. And I resisted all last week, and my resolve has broken this time. But also, a good book to get is "I Am the Law: How Judge Dredd Predicted Our Future."
Ooh,
But
drop it in there.
By some arsehole, I don't know. But yes, Judge Dredd: The Shift, Ken Nyman and Nick Percival. What's your take on the first episode?
I mean, how much do I actually love the possibility of like a horror-related kind of time warpy sort of dread? Oh, that's like catnip to me. But I mean, Ken Nyman and Nick Percival are just such a dynamic duo. They're such a good duo together, and I think Percival in particular is such a perfect artist for Nyman. He builds this tension and kind of like dangles the carrot just enough, especially in his initial like installations of these stories where it does just kind of make you go, okay, but what now? Like you've already set this stage where once again, like Mega City 1 itself is already possibly an antagonist in relation to folklore and playing around like the mental health that probably goes into living in a city like that in this environment. And then you get Nick Percival with all these muddy colors and just grays and everything's very cold looking, and so I'm on the hook entirely. Like give me something daunting and depressing. I'm in.
This is one of the interesting things about how different writers do setups within a Dredd story, because you've got 5 or 6 pages, and you've either got one of 2 strategies to go with. Either you like straight up first page is all the information you need and you go straight into it, or you have to basically spend most of that episode, well, all of that episode, just introducing everything and building everything up,
Yeah.
and in a strip that needs to be hyper compressed even when it's taking things slowly, that's quite a tightrope to walk for a writer.
Yeah. That's
Um,
quite a feat.
yeah, and I think Ken's quite good at that. And it's yeah, no, it's nice to start off, particularly considering what's going on in the world. It's nice to start off 2025 with a bit of horror, which
Yes. It
is
feels fitting.
yeah.
That's correct.
Of course, the other thing, by complete contrast, almost, I mean, a diametrically opposed contrast. Full Tilt Boogie is back.
It's
Alex
back.
de Campi. Oh, I'm so sorry, Alex. And Eduardo Asana with colors by Julia Briscoe. Hello, Julia. And letters by Simon Boland. And I mean, this, like I said, this is diametric opposed. This is like the other end of the scale. Like it,
Mhm.
and we were talking just before we started recording about how Full Tilt Boogie doesn't feel like anything else in the prog.
Yes.
And that's really that's such like it's like a palate cleanser. You know, you come out this dark and dingy Dredd, and then all of a sudden it's this kind of manga anime inspired kind of sci-fi, and that's there's any other comic I think that would jar.
Yeah, but I like, it is kind of like a palate cleanser in the
Mm.
middle of all these stories that are very, very dark, very horrific, and things like that, and there's, um like, to me, Full Tilt Boogie, reads very much like an American indie sci-fi
Mm, mm,
comic, from probably, like, 20, 30 years ago, and I love that, and but it's so funny seeing that just, like, dropped into the middle of the prog,
mm,
so it's
mm,
kinda like it's this stark shift that, like, it does work because it breaks it up a little bit. You think you get this moment of reprieve,
mm,
and then we're right back into it, so
mm.
it works. It's nice seeing, who is it? Eduardo Ocano as well on the art. Like, it's just very playful.
Yeah.
It's playful, and it sticks out among the grays and the muddy colors, and the grimness.
Well, it's something that I mean, to be brutally honest, 2008 has always struggled with is that lighter touch,
Mhm.
and particularly, 'cause I mean, this is something that we're going to come on to with the theme for this episode, but particularly where in the past, and you know, fully aware that this is an issue with 2000 AD, that the number of female writers on the prog is not even in double figures
Yeah.
after almost 50 years. But I
Oh,
mean,
we'll get there.
you go back to Hilary Robinson and people like that, and rather than necessarily drawing on things like movies and the more obviously male orientated sci-fi, this very much feels in the kind of like the Ursula Le Guin
I can
end of
see
the
that.
spectrum, you know.
Definitely. That's never occurred to me, but that fits really well.
And and for me, that's a breath of fresh air. And Full Tilt Boogie has
Mhm.
always been a breath of fresh air for me. And you know, shout out to Eduardo for fantastic. I mean, it's really nice to see how Julia has kind of followed his coloring on the earlier
Yeah,
series. So
yeah.
there's no kind of thematic break there, which is really nice. 2418 is out now in the UK and digitally, and from 2000 AD app. Just before we talk about this week's theme, I've had some very nice deliveries to my corner of the sub annex of the Nerve Center. I wanted to highlight
Mm.
The Complete Shakara by Robbie Williams, Robbie Morrison. I'm really on one today, aren't I, with names? Robbie Morrison and Henry Flint. This is the good shiz. You know, talking about how Full Tilt Boogie is like 2000 AD sci-fi.
Mhm.
This is 2000 AD sci-fi. I
That's like
mean,
the pinnacle.
Yeah, and having it all in one book, it just Henry's a mad genius.
Yeah.
Robbie's great too, but uh, but yeah, he properly gave Henry like full
Yeah.
flight on this thing, which is absolutely amazing.
We're gonna have to do a discussion episode on Shikara.
Oh, I 100.
Like, we're
Let's,
absolutely have to.
we should, I mean, Henry would probably curl up into a ball and just refuse to talk, but maybe get Robbie on to talk about that one. This is coming up. Cover story, the 2008 design art of Robin Smith. Now, this is fantastic stuff. You may have, if you read the magazine, you may have seen this stuff in a supplement some time ago. But it's basically a good chunk of all the. So, for those who don't know, Robin Smith was the art editor for 2000 AD back in the 80s, and he would send like cover ideas because he had to
Mhm.
design the front cover. He'd basically send a fax or a sketch or something to an artist and say, "Look, this is basically what we want, so we can fit all the cover design around it." And then when you look at like a Steve Dillon Cry the Werewolf, and
Like,
then you see
seriously.
what Robin sent to him, and you realize that Robin was integral to like this classic period of 2000 AD cover art. And that's just it's great. It's thick as well. Really great book. Final one.
Sell 'em.
And I feel like this one has particular importance to you, Chloe, because
Yeah.
it has your words
Does it
upon the
really?
cover. Yeah,
Oh,
I mean,
neat. Does
when you
it
saw this originally, you sent me a message saying that you cried a little. But this is the 2000 AD Slain Definitive Edition.
Mm.
So for those of you who've had the Nemesis definitive books, this now does the same with Slain. And on the cover, we've got Pat Mills, Andrew Kincaid, Massimo Bellardinelli, Mick McMahon, and a quote from the Gutter Review from one Chloe M. Every comic book artist should want to be Mick McMahon.
Yeah,
He's a hell of an
it's true,
endorsement.
though.
So this is, I mean, the camera can't really do it justice, but this is the early classic era of Slain, beautifully presented, and especially if you get the big hard cover with the
Mm.
gold foil
Shiny,
embossing.
shiny.
Anyone who's seen the Nemesis book, I realized I just smeared a
Oh, it's
thumb all over the
shiny.
back of that. Anyone who's seen the Nemesis books will know how beautiful they are. Another cracking job by Gemma Sheldrake, our in-house designer on those. This hardcover, a bit of ASMR there for people listening, is our web shop exclusive. I think also I need to check that maybe going out through Diamond, assuming Diamond is still around.
Hi, if they're
Um,
still here.
yeah. And so definitely worth getting. Right. Moving on to our theme for this episode. One of the things that's kind of come out of our discussions over this little while is kind of the lesser known 2000 AD, like the hidden gems of 2000 AD. Like, who are the artists and writers of the series that are underrated?
That's
Is
so subjective too.
exactly. But it's in the discussions that we've had, there's key artists who just never seem to get their due. Not necessarily that people don't mention them, because of course they do, but that their place and their importance within 2000 AD and its history just isn't necessarily. It's taken a bit for granted, you know.
Mhm.
Because I mean, you mentioned Massimo Bellardinelli.
Yeah, that's I was just thinking that when you had the Slain book up. I'm
Yeah.
like, every once in a while I'll hear Bellardinelli's name brought up in discussion with 2000 AD stuff. But I don't think anybody really takes the time to sit down and look
Yeah.
at the not just the body of work, but like the attention to detail and how
Mm.
everything's just kind of frenetic and all over the place and still somehow really tight.
Mm.
It's the wildest artwork, and especially I'm just saying, nobody loves Ace Trucking enough. Like, nobody loves it enough. It needs more love. Um, and that series in particular, at least for me, was, like, what totally got me on the train of Massimo's body of work,
Mm.
and it's just it's beautiful, and he does sci-fi so well.
And
Um
I mean, it's a point that I think it's Pat Mills makes, which is that because Massimo was the artist on Dan Dare,
Yeah,
um, and I, someone in the office, I think, said to Pat, "Oh, it's a bit phantasmagorical in it," and
good.
and that's the thing. He manages to fuse. He is one of those artists who fuses the fantastical and the sci-fi.
Mhm.
So everything looks organic. So when Dan Dare is waving around an organic living axe, it's
Yeah,
100% believable. It's more
yeah.
organic than it is axe, and that's
Mhm.
important for that. And it's the same when and I mean, you mentioned Ace Trucking there. The aliens in Ace Trucking
Yeah.
wouldn't work, I don't think, under anyone else's pen.
Not at all. It's because they're over the top,
Mm.
and, especially when it comes to things that are supposed to be kind of in the realm of fantasy and sci-fi and things, why wouldn't you go balls deep on that? Like, why I don't know if I can say go balls deep on
You know what? If we ever do a reprint of Ace Trucking, that's going on the cover. Why wouldn't you go balls deep? Chloe Maville, 2018 podcast.
but it's true, and that's the best way to put it, because he does, he just goes so hard into everything, whether it's, like, backgrounds, character creation, it's all a little bit larger than life,
Mm.
and that's ah, more love for the what I'm getting down to is more love for Massimo and more love for Ace Trucking, people. Get
Well,
together.
I mean, if the collections of Ace Trucking have been out of print for some time. If you want new editions, Earthlets, get in touch, and I can pass those along because I'm all in favour.
We do.
Literally organising like letter writing campaigns against
Yeah, yeah,
my colleagues.
yeah.
Please bully
Yep.
my colleagues into reprinting a book that I want to see.
I'm just
Um,
gonna I'm just gonna start bullying you. That's what it
okay,
is.
yeah. So, I
Like,
mean, how is that any different to normal? To be quite frank.
this is why it
Um,
works.
well, yeah, quite. But I mean, it's if you know your 2080 history, it's an obvious one to mention. But with the Slain stuff, of course, Titan skipped over Massimo's work
Yeah.
in order to get to mix. And from a commercial point of view, I guess in the 80s that made sense. But I think what that did was it automatically meant that he would be lesser known. Like he wasn't as high profile as Mick or Brian or any of those guys. And that's a real shame. I always wanted to interview him, and
Aw.
he wasn't very well towards the end of his life. And we just a fan of his who'd got in contact with him and talked to him regularly. Robbie, we'd arranged for me to send some questions, and then he passed away,
Aw.
and so I was
Aw.
quite gutted about that, which is a real shame. But just on, I mean, 2000s history is littered with artists like this well, creators like this who just simply do not get the due that they deserve. I mean, what for you? What does being underrated mean when you're at 2000 AD?
Oh, come on, that's a hard question.
Exactly. And I'm gonna take my tea and I'm just gonna lean back in my chair and let
Uh,
you answer that one.
I think thankfully because, like, 2000 AD has such a long history and has such an interesting, like, very devoted fan base, everybody gets a little bit of attention. And I think whoever is in the spotlight right now gets lots of attention, but for the most part, because the history is so big, it's kind of like a sprinkling across the board. And you get some that are bigger than others, like McMahon, obviously do all of his flowers. Um, and then you get these people who their work is almost to be too spectacular or too out there in like a way that is outside of anything else that you do see in the prog
Mm.
to um to fully be appreciated at least in the now. I
Yeah.
think that getting to go back and look at a lot of things like Blardinelli and a whole bunch of just hordes of other people, you can, in hindsight, go, "Oh, this was one of the best things I've ever seen." But,
Mm.
hindsight doesn't do everybody a lot of good. So it's nice to give people their due now. One person that I did have on my list, speaking of, like, right now, is Phil Winslade.
Mm.
I cannot get enough of his work. Like,
Yeah.
on Lawless in particular, it's shocking. Like, how his praises are not being sung left, right, and center is beyond me.
Mm. Mm.
It's just like, this is just gonna be a discussion of me going, "Get it together, people." Like, "Get it together."
You're entirely right, because with something like Lawless, this was the point I was going to make, is that sometimes when people at 2000 AD, they're doing their career best work, but sometimes it can appear so easy
Yeah, I
and
suppose.
so regularly that actually it kind of almost, it doesn't breed contempt, but it just makes people kind of relax a little bit too much. And Phil's a perfect example. Like, we're spoilt rotten with Lawless,
Yeah.
um, and yet, published anywhere else, Eisner nomination, and
Yeah,
we put it
absolutely.
in every year. But the obvious example, and again, you mentioned this off camera, but someone like Nigel Dobbin,
Oh, yeah.
who was just so great at making things feel right and real, and his storytelling was so strong that you took it for granted. And I think that this is a major element in when you talk about 2000 AD underrated. It's
Mhm.
not necessarily that people don't appreciate that it's good. It's just they take it for granted.
Yeah.
You know,
See, this is why you're the smart one. Like, you take all of my rambling and you compound it into something that makes sense. Um,
it's a dangerous world where I'm the smart one.
Whew, boy, it's it's a good thing we're so good looking, Mike. The
um, yeah.
we're I think that, yeah, I think it is like a taking it for granted sort of
Mm,
thing. That seems like a good succinct way to put it. And you know who I'm gonna talk about.
yeah.
I know this is for for those listening and not watching, I have been leading Mike up to this for the past week, and I've finally just gotten to see this look of, like, exhausted, like,
That's,
just
mate, that's just how I am now.
it's just the standard. So one of the creators, a writer, because I keep mentioning artists because I'm a big art nerd, but a writer who I feel is criminally underrated is John Smith.
Mm,
Anybody who has talked to me about these comics or visited my former website, Now Magazine, The Gutter Review, knows that I have a really big soft spot for John Smith.
mm,
And what it comes down to is I think that John was just too out there for a lot of people.
mm,
He's a very lyrical writer. It's very flowery.
mm.
And at the same time, bear with me on this, John Smith wrote for the freaks. He wrote for me. He wrote for all of it. And
Yeah. No, you're right. I think the challenge with John's career is that he came up at a time when Vertigo was starting,
yeah.
when you'd got Neil Gaiman, um,
No.
Grant Morrison, who were doing weird stuff in their own way, but in a way that often, and this is not necessarily a criticism, that was palatable
I
for
was just about to say that.
a wider audience. Whereas John never had that filter,
Did not
never had that block.
care. Did not care. Like, and maybe that's, like, I'm such a contrarian sometimes, maybe that's why I attach myself so well to it, but, like, and the stories vary so much. I mean, you get things like Firekind, and you can also I was reading, a 2080 annual from I don't even remember what year it was, but there's just a prose story that he
Mm.
wrote. It was like 4 maybe 4 pages long, and it was just this little short story basically about 2, like, really vengeful worms having sex, and I was like, "This is the best thing I've ever read." Like, this is so disquieting and uncomfortable, and it
Mm.
in a way that you can't stop reading it. And I think that John is definitely somebody that made I think he was palatable in his own way if you were willing to meet him where he was coming from.
Yeah.
And, um, I think it's I think weirdly enough that a lot of John Smith stories are also a palate cleanser, but on the opposite end of the spectrum. No, just like,
Yeah.
shush. Let me have this. I think they're a palate cleanser on the opposite end of the spectrum in that they do make you confront things that are, um, a little bit less widespread, a little bit more uncomfortable to read, um, and there's a lot of value in that. There is value in art that makes you uncomfortable.
I wholeheartedly agree, and the perfect example for me is Revere.
Mhm.
Now, if you're listening or watching, you've never read Revere, go onto the 2080 app, and it's on there
Please
as a
read
digital
it.
exclusive. And do yourself a favor. It's Simon Harrison. Now, I interviewed Simon beginning of last year.
Also underrated.
Very underrated. And Revere, uh, those first few episodes, just incredible. Like the best kind of sci-fi you could possibly make. You can feel the heat coming off of the environment that he's in. You can feel his thirst because of the way John writes him. And it's weird and it's queer and it's
Yeah.
odd, and there's you're entirely right. And I think probably out of all the kind of big writers at 2000 AD, John certainly is the most underrated and easily passed over, which is a real shame because I love
Yes.
his Indigo Prime.
Oh, yeah, Indigo Prime's amazing.
Yeah,
Like,
uh,
Indigo Prime, Devil
yeah,
you know,
Tyranny Rex.
OG Devil Tyranny
Yeah.
Rex, that's right. There's just, and I will kinda I know that we're kind of running short on time, but I will say this, one of the praises that I sing of his work all the time, and one of the things that I do think makes him so underrated, especially during the period that he was writing all these things, John very much writes, um not even necessarily queer as in gay, but queer
Mm.
as in, you know,
Yeah.
queer as in FU, and sometimes it's both, and I like, what a great thing to bring
Mm.
to, like, the sci-fi and fantasy element.
Yeah. Yeah.
What other setting does that fit
Mm.
better?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely, absolutely. I will sort of round this off by mentioning, and again, this is most people who are into 2080 would go, oh, they're not underrated. Ron Smith.
Ron Smith, absolutely, yeah.
If and I've said this before on the podcast, if you look at his body of work in the 1980s, um, it's just incredible. He's the guy who's actually creating Mega City One.
Yeah,
Um, you know,
literally from the
every,
floor up.
yeah, everyone else is contributing, yeah, but it's in those things you remember, like you really feel the mile high towers.
Mhm.
There's the story about the mobile service station that
Yeah.
gets corrupted and starts chucking cars all over the place and whatnot. And Dredd lures it off an unfinished highway, and and you feel it go down. And then there's this wonderful moment where it hits. Uh, the ground, and there's a sound effect of a kind of like a boom,
Yeah.
but it's rendered as city blocks, like buildings. It literally the sound effect looks like buildings. I could wax lyrical about Ron's artwork for a long time, but massively underrated. Do tell us who you think is the underrated creators in 2000 AD's history, the underrated
Yeah.
script.
I'm particularly looking forward to the feedback on this one. Like, I really, really want to know, like, because if nothing else, especially if it's people that I've not heard of, I'm so excited to like dive deeper.
Yeah,
Let's
absolutely.
go.
And tell us your gems. Like what are the
Yes.
gems from the archive? And we'll go through them on next week. How is this episode over already? Like
I don't know.
I know. We said we'll keep it to about half an hour, but we prattle on, and then all of a sudden it's done. And there's so much more to say. I haven't even gotten to talk about Teo Demoto, which is usually what I end
This
up.
is this is what keeps happening. We have too much to
a,
say.
a,
We just
a
keep
not
getting
a
longer
not
and longer.
insignificant number of conversations in my life end up with me referencing Teo Demoto from the 1990s, which probably not great. We'll be back in 7 days time, Earthlets. Thank you so much for tuning in to In Orbit every Wednesday. I think we're going to be talking horror and Judge Dredd next week, by the sounds of it. So look forward to that. Please do feedback on the YouTube channel, on Blue Sky and Twitter and Facebook and wherever else. If you want to get in touch direct with us, it's thrillcast at 2000ad.com. That's thrillcast, all one word, at 2000ad.com. I have been your host, Molch-R. She has been your host, Chloe. And this has been another episode of In Orbit every Wednesday. And splendid Earth Earthlets.
We'll see you next week.
Get 2000 AD now. Get.
Well, thanks for joining us on In Orbit every Wednesday, Earthlets. Make sure you like and subscribe and go along to 2000 AD, where you'll be able to subscribe to 2000 AD and the Judge Dredd magazine. Sign up to our newsletter and you'll get hundreds of pages of free comics to download. And download the app for your Apple and Android devices. Now, don't forget, Earthlets, this is the 2000 AD universe. We just live in it.